Before the internet, reporters and journalists were separated from a huge potential audience of billions by vast gaps, both technological and geographical. In the 1990s, we got the earliest version of the internet. Let's call it Web 1. The explosion of mostly static websites that gave everyone unprecedented new access to information regardless of geography. Instantaneous access to a whole new universe of news and information could now traverse previously insurmountable geographic barriers. Your potential audience now consists of the entire world. But in Web 1, not just anyone could bridge that gap to publish online and reach the global audience on the other side. So by the mid-2000s, just as news organizations were getting the hang of Web 1, centralized proprietary platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube built huge bridges of their own, giving anyone the power to publish and find an audience. These bridges were free for anyone to cross, or at least that's how it seemed at first. But it turned out to be more like one of those toll bridges that snaps a picture of your license plate and bills you later. This hidden toll was handing over ultimate control to the platforms. So far, the masses have been willing to pay that toll, and the impact on journalists is clear. The competition for publishing now includes the entire world, and they don't necessarily have to play by the same rules or ethics as journalists. And it turns out that relying on just a few privately controlled bridges for the flow of society's vital information can lead to problems. Sometimes the best information doesn't get to the other side or gets lost in traffic completely. This brings us to our vision of Web 3, which makes use of new open source technologies built with the public interest in mind rather than profits.
Here's some of the things that Web 3 can improve on Web 2. Well, first of all, Web 3 is distributed. Web 2 is centralized. It's a centralized database. There's one copy of one file sitting somewhere on one database. And whenever you type in a web address, that web address points to that one specific file on that one database in one central storage spot.
One of the main benefits with Web 3 is this decentralization of the servers themselves. So the information itself from a journalist's story doesn't live on a server that's in one geographic location that can then be censored or shut down by, political influences or by authorities. One of the beautiful things of Web 3 is that it makes that data, it protects data, it makes it immutable. So if you do produce a story that is potentially politically volatile, because the information lives on multiple servers around the world, in theory, it can't be shut down and it can't be censored. And once it's minted on chain, it can't be altered. Once you really get into that specific issue and really hone into the technicalities behind it, that for me is the game changer when I'm explaining this technology to journalists. When they understand that their work and their legacy can be protected from, existing political forces or forces that we haven't even entered yet. We're going to enter political landscapes in the coming years that we can't really predict. So this gives a layer of protection in between the journalists, their work, and also it allows the audience to know that this information hasn't been tampered with.
Web3 gives us something we've never had before, which is digital permanence and digital immutability. Because everything is distributed among so many people, there's not one place that can shut it down. And so for the first time, we can have a proof that this thing happened before this thing, and nobody, no matter how much they want to, could come in and change that. And a kind of unintuitive effect of that is just simply from getting like this happened first and then this happened, we actually get to immutability and permanence, which for journalists means they have the holy grail, something that they've never really had before, where you can never be sure if a photo or a piece of text was ever edited. Well, now every piece of content has a transaction log that's verifiable because there's no one person who could have changed it. People can try, but then nobody else will verify that that was the source of truth. And so we kind of have a public permanent internet for the first time. An interesting result of everything being distributed is that you can actually own your own content for the first time. With permanence comes ownership rights, property rights. Before, if you take a photo and then put it on the internet, that can just be copied and pasted a million times and everyone can claim that they own it. But with Web3, you can take the picture and you have proof that your camera took that picture at this date and that you own it, and that no matter what happens to that photo afterwards, you can always point to the record and say, I own this photo, here's the proof. If you project that out long enough, then you see that all your stories adhere to the same rules. All of your work products, they reside with you. And then if an outlet wants to publish those, they have to license that from you. If an audience wants to access something, you can control that access as well.
On top of that, the creator of that audio and visual or the text document can create an NFT out of that material. And an NFT implies direct ownership of a digital asset, which has never been able to be done before. And if somebody owns that, it could be embedded, baked, written into that code that the creator of that asset owns it. Anybody wanting to use that asset would have to pay for that asset. And that payment would automatically, by smart contract, go back to the original creator of that, no matter where it goes or how many hands it changes into. That could create an alternative economics that could help support journalism and independent journalists, moving from a publisher audience relationship to creating a community in what the audience is more interested or involved in.
One trend we're seeing right now in the context of Web 2 as we're approaching increased adoption of Web3 technologies is this trend of content creators such as journalists using newsletter platforms and other such publication platforms to reach a niche audience of patrons who can directly support them rather than having to appeal to a broader general audience. And this trend, we think, is kind of inevitably leading into the territory of Web3, but the technologies themselves are still being fleshed out and are still nascent. And we could end up at a situation where content creators such as journalists using these newsletter-like platforms may have an even less mediated economic situation where they can upload their writings to a shared database and be supported directly by their audience.
Web3 doesn't rely on yet another privately held platform staying in business for you to stay in business. So you're not dependent on them. It can be a conceptual hurdle to think about what's between you and an audience in Web3, but once you move past that, it becomes increasingly clear, this direct connection between you, the content creator, and the audience without the middle people in there.
Web3 is building tools. There's no one person who's hosting it. We all have to host it together. And so there's no way to make all the nodes of a network just completely shut something down. Part of why JournoDAO exists is because we see that there is a huge gap between the tools as we understand them and the journalists who we think would get a lot of benefit out of it. So we're trying to connect the two. And part of that means building some of these workflows ourselves, maybe some of the software, but also just supporting the people out there who are already building these tools and guiding them from the journalist perspective as to what would be the most helpful. I think that there's no reason that the interface that journalists are used to, whether it's Substack or YouTube or WordPress, why Web3 can't feel exactly the same. There's just different mechanisms underneath it.
When journalists begin to actually uncover what is beneath the surface of Web3, they're going to discover that there is this inherent protection mechanism built within the technology that protects the journalist, protects their work from outside forces being able to remove information from the internet, from servers. It also creates a sense of autonomy for journalists that I don't think we've really seen before.
These technologies provide the power for media outlets and even individuals to build countless new bridges across the many gaps that separate us. What's more, these bridges can also be portable and retractable. While this tech is still nascent, right now journalists around the globe can bypass large, proprietary, and centralized tech platforms to publish and license content, build an audience, manage subscribers, open new revenue streams, interact with sources, hire freelancers, and a multitude of other use cases we haven't even thought of yet. As with Web 1 and Web 2, we stand at the precipice of a new age of possibility. But this time, the journalists and creators can maintain autonomy and cultivate sustainability without permission from editors, advertisers, or gatekeepers.